Hello and welcome to the CSEA Public Sector Local and Unit Election Meeting Chairperson Training video series. If you're listening to this presentation, you have been asked to serve as an election meeting chairperson for one of CSEA's public sector locals or units. This presentation is the first in a series of videos intended to assist you with preparing for and running the election for officers of your bargaining unit. You have CSEA's thanks for accepting this responsibility, and you have the statewide election committee's support along the way. My name is Leslie Perrin, Deputy Counsel in the CSEA Legal Department, and I'm one of the staff members who support the statewide election committee. I will be walking you through the process of running an election. The trainings will be broken down into 4 separate sessions. You can listen to them and review them when you arrive at that stage of your election process. We'll begin in this session with a general overview of the entire election process, then discuss the first steps that an election meeting chair must take. The next session will discuss the nomination and application process. The third session will cover what happens once the application period has ended. We'll discuss how to conduct a drawing for a position on the ballot, how to draft ballots and instructions, the use of ballots in elections at meetings, proper campaigning, meet the candidates events, and the meeting chair's role in these parts of the process. Then, in the final session, we'll cover what happens the day of your election. We'll go over the count process in detail, then explain certification and reporting of election results, as well as how to deal with protests and what to do once the election is concluded. If you are an election meeting chairperson, you will have signed this form, the Election Meeting Chairperson Data Form. I mention this form because by signing it, you have agreed that you are not eligible to run for office in the local or unit for which you are acting as the election meeting chair. You cannot resign as chair and run for office. However, to be clear, if you're serving on the election committee for a unit, you may run for local office and vice versa. You should have received a packet of materials from us on behalf of the statewide election committee, including this manual of procedures and forms, which contains detailed information and instructions about all aspects of the election, much of which will be covered during these training sessions. It also contains all of the forms that you may need during your election process. All the forms pages are perforated so that they can be torn out and used or copied. You will not need all of the forms in the booklet, but the statewide election committee tried to include different versions of many items so that there would be at least an example suitable to any situation. Of course, you can always just use the forms as a model and create your own versions. Where there are specific things that are required by a CSEA constitution or bylaws or by the standing rules and regulations of the statewide election committee, we've made an effort to point that out by using italics and parentheses, and this will be discussed as we go along. Okay, the first step that you should take as an election meeting chair is to become familiar with the procedures and forms in the booklet. Try not to feel overwhelmed by the size of the packet of material. Not all of the information is going to be relevant to every local or unit election. At the top of your packet that you received is a cover letter that lists the information and documentation inside the materials. You've received a copy of the candidate's handbook for your reference. You've received a local or unit constitution, whichever is appropriate. You've received the manual that we were just looking at the cover of before. You've received a copy of the statewide election committee standing rules and regulations. You've received a copy of the notice regarding campaigning. You've received a candidate eligibility list to verify possible candidates when you get to the nomination period. And you've received a purple sheet of paper that says it's the election listings notice for your reference, which explains what the candidate eligibility list is and the mailing that you'll receive with a voter eligibility list later in the process. Also, inside the booklet with the forms and all of the procedures in the manual, there are checklists throughout the booklet which will help you at each step of the process, as well as an overview of the entire process from beginning to end, which can be found on pages 5 and 6 of the booklet. As you get started and as you move forward, folks here at headquarters will be available to guide you. Certain departments here at headquarters have specific roles in the election process, and that's outlined on this slide. Please don't worry about writing these numbers down. The same information is contained on page 1 of the manual. The roles of the different departments are explained on pages 2 to 3. You should know that we do our best to maintain a log of all calls received across departments. That way, when you speak with different people or departments, we should be able to see a snapshot of what's been taking place in your election, and that will help us be helpful to you as quickly as possible. As the meeting chairperson, you have certain responsibilities. In general, the meeting chairperson's overall responsibility is to make sure that an election takes place, that it's conducted according to CSEA's rules of procedure, and that it is a fair and unbiased process. More specifically, the chair maintains control over all of the paperwork that relates to the election, from nomination forms to ballots and results. At the start of the process, the meeting chair must make certain decisions about the election. Since you are a meeting chair, the executive board of your local or unit has already determined that the election will take place at a meeting. The executive board may also have set a budget. So as you get started, you should review the procedures manual as well as the notices that you're going to need to post and your local or unit's bylaws. You should select or create an election schedule, ensure that the cost of the election doesn't exceed the budget established by the local or unit executive board, decide whether to hold election events, and at the end of the process, you'll need to post notice of and certify the election results to the membership and to CSEA headquarters. Keep in mind that balloting, by which I mean the actual voting for officers by the membership at an election meeting, must take place between May 15th and June 15th of 2017. Voting cannot take place earlier than that. However, there are other deadlines by which certain things have to happen, and there are sometimes time frames that must exist between one step of the process and the next in order for the election to be run properly. The very first thing that must happen is that you, as the meeting chair, must post copies of the notice of election so that members know that it's about to take place and can see what positions there are to be elected in the local or unit. This notice, the M3 on the left-hand portion of your screen, also contains contact information for you as chair. Then you'll also be posting copies of the several-page standing rules and regulations. The first page is on the right-hand side of this screen. And this, the CSEA notice regarding campaigning. Copies of these are in the packet that you received. These documents must be posted on bulletin boards at every work site within your local or unit. These postings must be up for at least 15 days before the nomination or application process can begin. And before you can post these notices, you need to pick or create an election schedule, which will also be posted. To make things as easy as possible, because there's a lot of detail in putting together an election schedule, the statewide election committee has provided 3 sample schedules for an election at a meeting. These schedules appear on pages 23 to 25 of the manual. If you look at Form S4, you'll see that some of the information listed on the form appears in italic font. Wherever you see italics, the statewide election committee is trying to call to your attention the fact that the information is required by the CSEA local or unit constitution, bylaws, or the standing rules and regulations. For example, on Schedule S4, at the March 15th date, which is the first date on the schedule, you'll notice in italics that it states that the postings must be up for at least 15 days before the nomination period may begin. That is a constitutional requirement. I mentioned earlier that balloting or voting must take place between May 15th and June 15th of the election year. This first sample schedule, S4, is based on having voting take place at the earliest possible time, with a meeting held on Sunday, May 15th. Each of the other sample schedules that follow, S5 and S6, are spread out a couple of weeks down the road, basically in 2-week intervals, getting you toward the potential latest date of balloting taking place near or on June 15th. Of course, you can create your own schedule as long as your schedule meets the procedural requirements noted here in italics and also explained in the manual on page 5. And you can always touch base with us here at headquarters with the statewide election committee to make sure your proposed schedule is acceptable so that protests and complaints are avoided. If you pick one of the schedules in the forms manual, again, it's perforated, so you can simply tear it out Make sufficient photocopies of it and post it with the rest of your notices. In any case, please don't worry. Obviously, I don't know when you are listening to this recording, but no matter when you're getting started, the statewide election committee can assist you to create a schedule that will get the job done. Well, that is what we wanted to cover in the first presentation. Should be enough information to get you started. When you're finished, you can move on to the next training presentation for the nomination process. We look forward to working with you to have a successful election season, and good luck.